You are likely using only 23% of the available seam types in your work right now. And what is actually worse, you might be unaware that over 40% of the existing seam options even exist in the first place.
It is a staggering blind spot in the apparel industry. Product developers and technical designers get locked into this holding pattern. They're just recycling the same handful of tech packs simply to meet seasonal deadlines.
If you are developing products, working with manufacturers, and writing tech packs every day, having a limited vocabulary in garment construction is a massive professional liability.
It really is. When
Yeah.
you cycle through those familiar seams just because they feel safe, you leave immense potential on the cutting room floor.
So let's unpack this because relying on the same 23% of seams is like a master chef insisting on using only salt and pepper. We are unpacking how to categorize and select seams effectively, which is going to change how you communicate with your manufacturers and, frankly, instantly elevate the precision of your garments.
And to start integrating that hidden 77%, you first have to understand how the industry organizes the options. Seams are not just thrown into a manual alphabetically. They are categorized methodically. But the core of the confusion for many technical designers is that seams are actually grouped in more than one way.
I am looking at the documentation here, and it seems like there are two different languages being spoken. You have the ISO system and you have the ABC seams system. I suspect this is where a lot of technical designers start crossing their wires when writing their specifications. Because the ISO system reads like a mechanic's manual, it seems entirely focused on how the fabric layers physically sit at the final pass under the sewing machine.
That is exactly what it's doing. The ISO system classifies a seam based on its construction method from the machine's perspective.
But as a designer, I don't necessarily care about the needle's mechanical path, do I? I care about how a jacket sits on a human shoulder. I care about the drape. Is that the disconnect?
It is the primary disconnect, yes. What's fascinating here is how looking at the exact same seam from two different angles fundamentally changes how a technical designer approaches a tech pack. And that is why we have the second lens, which is the ABC seam system. This system classifies by what the seam actually does for the garment. It focuses entirely on purpose and function. What job is this seam performing? Is it building the shape? Is it stopping a raw edge from unraveling?
Which brings us to the first of the three categories in the ABC seams system. If we are engineering a garment from scratch, we have to build the foundational shell first. We need load-bearing walls.
And those load-bearing walls are your construction seams. This is the very first category when you classify by purpose. Construction seams join separate pieces of fabric together to build the basic structure. They are entirely about strength and durability.
Because without them, you literally just have a pile of fabric panels sitting on a cutting table.
Just a flat pattern. And within this construction class, we have highly specific types.
But a strong foundation doesn't mean much if the garment disintegrates from the inside out after a single wash because the edges were left raw.
Which is exactly where we cross into the second category of purpose. Finish seams. Finish seams have a completely different job. They are not joining panels to build the overall structure. Their singular purpose is to secure raw edges, stop aggressive fraying, and improve the inside of the garment. If your finished seams fail, the piece literally unravels. The most common examples here revolve around hems. A single fold hem is coded as H100. You see this constantly as the standard hem on a basic cotton t-shirt.
And it makes sense for a t-shirt, but what if I am working with a loosely woven linen?
If you specify an H100 single fold on a loose linen, you are guaranteeing a faulty product. The edge is still exposed on the inside. In that scenario, you have to step up to a double fold hem, H110, completely enclosing that raw edge inside the hem before stitching.
So we have our structure built with construction seams. We have locked down the edges with our finished seams. The garment is solid. Now, how do we manipulate its volume or introduce a specific aesthetic?
That requires the third and final category of purpose, which is decorative seams.
Now, hold on. When people hear the word decorative, they immediately picture superficial trims, embroidery, or, I don't know, sequins.
That's a common misconception.
But looking at the ABC system, this category is much more structural than that.
Highly structural. Decorative seams serve ornamental and functional purposes. But crucially, they are often responsible for changing the physical volume of the garment. The primary example here is a pleat, coded as D110. Think of a classic pleated skirt. The pleats manage the volume at the waist to fit the human body, You are sewing the material to itself to create a deliberate structural change that dictates volume.
All right, so we have the three categories locked in: construction to build, finish to protect, decorative to shape. But even with these categories, I know highly experienced developers who still cause massive friction with their manufacturers because their terminology is sloppy.
Let's ram it. And in garment manufacturing, ambiguous terminology in a tech pack is not just an academic annoyance. It translates directly into factory delays, heavily inflated costs, incorrect sampling. A factory will always take the path of least resistance if your instructions are vague.
Let's clear up the three specific confusions that seem to cause the most chaos between the studio and the factory floor. The first one, seam class versus seam type. People use these interchangeably on a daily basis.
They really do. But they represent entirely different levels of magnification. A class is the broad group. Finish is a seam class. A type is the specific seam inside that broad group. The felled seam, C100, is a specific type that belongs to the construction class.
You have to specify the type. The second major confusion, seam versus stitch.
This is the absolute foundation of technical communication. A stitch is the individual loop of thread that the needle makes. A seam, however, is the physical, continuous line where fabric pieces or folds are joined together by a row of those stitches. Stitches build a seam, and the seam gives the garment its structure.
Which leads right into the third confusion, seam classification versus stitch classification.
Seam classification is entirely about how the fabric pieces are folded and joined together. Stitch classification is about how the thread loops themselves are mechanically formed by the needle and looper. They're different things that work together. A single seam type can be sewn with multiple different stitch types.
When you actually understand the mechanics, you know exactly when a simpler, faster hem will perfectly suffice for a garment's quality tier. You learn how to balance quality with cost efficiency because you actually understand the structural trade-offs you are making. We have the terminology. We understand the critical difference between the ISO machine lens and the ABC purpose lens, and we have unpacked the construction, finish, and decorative categories. Let's make this highly actionable. What is the exact operational order developers should follow the next time they sit down to spec a garment?
It comes down to a very specific three-step methodology. It is a repeatable checklist. Step 1, purpose first. Look at the specific seam location on your garment sketch and decide, is this primarily a construction seam, a finish seam, or a decorative seam?
Define the category first.
Step 2, structure. Once you know the purpose, you determine how the fabric layers actually need to sit to achieve that purpose.
Purpose, then structure. What is the final step?
Step 2, top stitch. This is where you choose the specific thread loop type.
So what does this all mean? This three-step methodology takes the overwhelming, highly technical complexity of garment construction and turns it into a logical, repeatable sequence. It forces you to stop relying on just salt and pepper and systematically evaluate the entire spice rack to guarantee a better product.
This raises an important question, though, for everyone listening. It is something I want you to genuinely consider the next time you open up your technical files. If you audited your current collection's tech packs right now, today, how much of that missing 77% of seams could you integrate? How many weak hems could be upgraded for longevity? And how many bulky, stiff-side seams could be streamlined for a better drape if you simply stepped outside that 23% comfort zone and started designing with purpose?